The Menscape Podcast with Carl.J. Ashley.
So, good evening and welcome everybody to the July edition of the Menscape Podcast, sponsored by Ancient Spiritual Tours of Ireland, and with the one and only Mr. Aldo Jordan. How are you doing, Aldo?
I'm good, Carl. Thank you very much. Lovely to be on your podcast today.
Excellent. So, without any further ado, won't you tell us who are you and what do you do?
I have no idea who I am. No idea.
That's the best answer we've had yet to that question.
Yeah.
Apart from infinite
Well,
consciousness.
infinite consciousness. Yeah. Well, I'm on this physical earth. My name is Aldo Jordan, and I'm the founder of the Irish School of Shamanic Studies, and we're based right over here on the west coast of Ireland in County Mayo.
Is that it? You don't do anything else? I'd say you do more than that one.
Yeah, I'll just keep it simple for today. But keep
So,
it simple. Yeah.
I've heard a lot about shamanism and the term shaman over the last few years. It seems to have been bandied about a lot more often. I guess there's a few different interpretations for people of what it means or what the connotations are. How would you best describe shamanism or a shaman? Obviously, it's a Siberian term.
Yeah,
What does it
sure.
mean to Irish people?
Yeah, well, to Irish people, well, I mean, as you just said there, Carl, the word shaman originates from the Tungus tribe of Siberia. They're a Siberian tribe, and down through the years of study through anthropology and archaeology and so on, the word became kind of coin phrased for individuals within a tribal setting, for example, or a community, an individual or individuals that will commune and secure the help of the spirit world in order to have great power in this world we live in. So, in other words, the individual in the tribe or the community had the ability to connect with the spirits in the spirit world and to secure their help and to take their advice and gather information, direction, and medicine from the spirits in the spirit world. So that's the basic interpretation. A man or a woman that had the ability to move outside of this reality into another reality or another world, deemed or known as the spirit world, to gather information, insight, knowledge from the spirit world.
I guess I better sort of make the point that as I'm not really into labels as such, but
Yeah.
as someone I would describe myself as a cosmic mystic psychic, that sort of as above, so below, the idea that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, that everything occurs in the spiritual realm in a primary, and then in the physical realm that we experience, the 3D here, almost as an after thing, but yet we're reared to believe that we're physical beings in a physical world first, and the spiritual is almost an afterthought. I guess in reality, you've got the physical, the spiritual, and then in between the kind of the liminal or the mental or the astral, as it were. So are you kind of existing in these three dimensions with full conscious awareness and able to in and out? So you're using a lot of discipline.
Yeah, well, that's the basic remit of the shaman or the shamanic healer, is to be able to move between the multiple dimensions that coexist around us at all times. So
Wow.
rather than being a linear reality or dimension we exist in as spirits, essentially spirits having a physical bodily experience in the physical world. That the remit of the shaman essentially is the ability to move in and out of these different dimensions for very specific reasons. And essentially, as I mentioned earlier, is to gather something from these other dimensions, bring them back, and to share them with the community. So it's knowledge, power, and medicine gathered from these places. So, as you know, Carl, I'm sure you're aware of, in the most modern science that we can tap into in the modern world is the quantum mechanics or quantum physics will now tell us in the modern world that we don't live in this linear dimension. We live in a multidimensional state. Shamans over the thousands of years had this knowledge and had the ability to move between these multi-dimensions, again, to gather something from those places.
I love this kind of conversation. I could talk about this for hours on end, right?
Yeah.
So, is there any way that you can learn or teach that to people then? Or are you kind of born with these capacities or gifts? Or
Yeah.
when you're say bringing students, so if somebody comes to you as a student, says, "Okay, train me up to be a shaman," is it possible that you might say, "Sorry, you don't meet the criteria," or "I don't think you have the gifts"? Is there a vetting process almost, or will you take anyone?
Well, the first port of call there, Carl, is that somebody actually stands up and takes action to say that I'm looking to at least explore this area in a deeper way. Nobody will pick up the phone and ring me up for the fun, for the crack, and say, I'd like to join your shamanic course. People are already on a path. They're very aware of this. And
Sure.
then they take that action to explore it in a deeper level and to experience it at a deeper level. I had a conversation with my students this weekend gone that, can we say that everybody born into this world has the ability to do this? I actually do believe that people have the ability.
Right.
Do people have healing abilities that, people generally, do they have healing abilities? My answer to that is yes, most probably they do. Who is called to it is another question. How deeply conditioned are people that will not go near this stuff because there is a narrowness to their consciousness? And I mean that as respectfully as I possibly can. So it's not that, Johnny is going to ring up on the street and say, I want to join your course. There is criteria to
But
enter
they've
into that.
usually met those criteria themselves, as it were.
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. As I said, people will not enter into a deep, comprehensive one-year shamanic program without already been on a path, and they're looking to explore and experience things more and at a deeper level. And essentially, that's a soul calling. Essentially, it's that there is a draw. It may be an ancestral draw. There's many elements to it, but there's a draw to get involved, and so they do. You know. And of course, then,
Mm.
Carol, there will be many hurdles to jump. And I mean that there will be many challenges through that 12-month program, um, where some people may not just hang on and they may just
I
let go
believe
and say,
it's. I
yeah,
believe
yeah,
it's. Yeah, I'd say
yeah,
if you have the courage to step up, then the universe will certainly throw some obstacles and hurdles in your way.
absolutely. One of the main things, Carol, within that is that, and I will say, what will shamanism do? And it's to unravel the deep set generational conditioning that we all have been subjected to in our lives. And what shamanism will allow us to do is to begin to unravel some of those restrictions, those inhibitions, those ancestral traumas, and everything else that brings an individual into that place of freedom. So that's the expansion of consciousness, essentially.
Mm. This this conversation's provoking a few questions and points. The first thing is, I love your
Yeah,
name, Aldo. Where does that come
yeah.
from? Is that short for Aldous, like Aldous Huxley?
No, and you know something I normally say to people, I can tell you my real name, but I'll have to kill you afterwards.
I believe it.
Yeah. So it certainly is a shortened version of a longer name.
Yeah.
And it was just to tell you how the name came about. There was a very famous footballer that I'm sure you're very aware of, a guy called John Aldridge, who played for the Republic of Ireland way back in the 1990s, and they used to call him Aldo for short. So when I was in school and playing football, they just shortened my name to Aldo because John Aldridge was quite a famous footballer at the time. And that's where it came from. there's no deeply spiritual rooted reason behind it, but but that's where it came from essentially,
Cool.
and it stuck. It stuck, and yeah, and that's it. And my surname Jordan, um, in fact, originates from about 13 or 14 miles from where I sit, where we have an 850-year ancestral connection with this very land that I live on here in this location of Mayo. So we'll track back our ancestry about 850 years and the Jordans, and yeah, so that's a bit of genealogy there for you.
Interesting. I don't know why I thought Jordan was a Welsh name.
No, uh,
Definitely
look at it.
Irish. Yeah.
Well, the basis of it is the River Jordan, where the water was taken from the River Jordan on crusades and brought back. Children were baptized with the water from the River Jordan, and they adopted the name. It was Mac Jordan, son of Jordan. So in this area here is where where the stronghold of the De Exeter clan. They were the De Exeters, where they originated from Normandy with Viking origin. Went along to the Norman conquest across the UK and Ireland. They tended to take names of places. So the Exeters or the Exonias were people that moved to Exeter in the UK, and 100 years later decided to come over to Ireland, and they settled in the west coast of Ireland here. Changed their name from De Exeter to Jordan because on crusades to the Middle East, they took water from the River Jordan, baptized their children. They discarded the name De Exeter and they took on the name Jordan. So that was here in this region here. Yeah.
I love that you took the time and the trouble to find all that out.
Well, I could talk, I could do 10 podcasts with you over the next 10 weeks just on that subject alone. But
This is really important because
yeah,
in a lot of the work I do with my clients around the world as the right coach, when you work with me to literally unpack and look at your shit and explore the story of your journey to share it, one of the themes that comes up time and time again is personal identity. Who are we? What are we? What are we doing? What are we not?
yeah,
And if you haven't, I believe if you haven't, as a man, understood your father and his role, or if you haven't understood your father and his mission or his destiny, you're almost likely to repeat in some way the mistakes of your father until you can't really step fully into your own manhood and masculinity until you've understood your father, is what I'm making a bugger of trying to say.
no, yeah, I know, and I get exactly what you're saying. There's an old saying, Carl, we got to know where we came from to know where we're going. And in other words, when we have that knowledge of our forefathers, it sets up this compass, this inner compass within us to give us great direction and vitality as we move forward. If we're in a space that, we're ungrounded into our identity, our lineage, our blood, then it can create a confusion or a lack of direction, lack of forward momentum, and a lack of pride. And pride is a good word. I mean, people might deem pride to be, a proud person in a negative sense, but pride is very important as well, to be proud of who we are and where we came from.
Yes.
The great feats and the great maybe struggles that our forefathers have gone through in their lives, and to have an idea of that. I mean, when I work when I'm working with people on an ancestral level, with students or with people on a one-to-one basis with ancestry,
Mm.
I do be surprised at times that people are unaware of, their, who they are and how they're deeply embedded in the earth of this here location, and I think it's important to know that, and it doesn't take a lot to connect with it. In our shamanic work, it's different in the sense that we do a lot of our otherworldly journeys, that we'll go back and connect with our ancestors, and we'll build a great relationship with our ancestors. And ancestral worship is one of the most widely practiced religious or spiritual practices, ancestral worship. Um, and connecting with the ancestors and how really important that is. Unfortunately, as you know, Carl, in modern times, that when the storytellers began to stop telling the stories and the storytellers died and the TV began to take over, people lost interest in the stories and the legends that the older generations used to tell. And that's not just in Ireland, that's in UK and right across the world. We see it in Mongolian shamanism, a great, and Siberian shamanism, a great tradition within that is the shaman is the Shanaki, the shaman is the storyteller, the wisdom
Right.
keeper, passing on these legends. And if we keep our ancestors, and we understand them, we bring them into our consciousness, they're a part of our existence today.
I think Buddy wants to say hi. Huh?
Hello, buddy.
He's saying hi. He's like, Dad, get off that computer and take me for a walk, won't you?
Yeah, yeah. It's
So again, this is fascinating in the sense that I have attended quite a few of these family constellations workshops over the year where you get to see how the energetics in the family system is played out. And of course, it was an African system sort of brought to the West and is a very useful way of being able to, I suppose, not so much correct, but rectify some of the things in the family system where it was taboo. Like somebody might have got raped, there might have been a miscarriage, there might have been a child born outside of wedlock. And the underlying theme is shame, shame in the family system. And being able to bring that up to then release it, to let it go, so that we're not carrying two suitcases full of it. And
yeah,
a lot of that's all subconscious until you bring it into the conscious awareness.
absolutely. And Carl,
Interestingly, yeah,
yeah,
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
on.
Yeah, and awareness or acknowledgement are key words there in what you've just spoken about is to bring it to consciousness and allow it to be acknowledged and then, released in the sense that it no longer has this negative um, inhibition in the family tree. So acknowledgement is key in our shamanic work. Um, we have multiple different methods of going back through the generations and beginning to essentially cleanse the threads of the traumas that still pass down through the line. And I also work quite extensively with people that are in addiction in whatever shape or form, and I can find in some instances the addiction is something that has been passed. So it's not the addiction that's passed on, but it's the trauma,
Yeah.
and that the response to the trauma is the addiction.
The
It's
addiction
the
is the coping mechanism.
exactly, and it can be of this lifetime. Of course, it can. People have experiences in this life of a traumatic nature that the response to that would be that they'll move into some kind of behavioral or substance addiction. But I do know that elements of addiction that is prevalent currently has an ancestral origin and it just passes down through generations and generations. So, in other words, Carl, as you mentioned earlier on, it's unresolved trauma that will continually affect and hurt the family tree until it becomes acknowledged and brought to the surface.
One of the guys that I've spoken about extensively to my clients in this respect is Gabor Mate and his work in multi-generational family trauma
Yeah.
and seeing that in society, it's almost like the drug is the problem. So whether it's alcohol, whether it's cocaine, whether it's heroin, whether it's coffee, chocolate, sex, what he was saying was he was addicted to buying classical music.
Yeah.
And there was no shame attached to it because it was seen as quite a respectable thing to do.
Yeah.
Got my Beethoven and it's like he was saying, no, no. He said, I used to leave people on a bed in the hospital, go downtown, splurge all my money on in the classical music shop and then come back and they'd all be saluting me. How are you? How are you doing? And he's
Yeah.
like, I was like dirty and shameful because I just left him on this trolley because I needed to go and I could do this. But he said because I overworked and because I was classical music addiction, nobody looked upon me as someone with a problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas he was helping the homeless and what have you in Vancouver and could explain very clearly why society is almost, it's almost, society is almost engineering us to be in a vibration of abandonment, lack of self-love, and naturally reach out to something to medicate with, and whatever that addiction is. And that's been a huge part of my journey is overcoming addictions, you
Yeah,
know?
and likewise, yeah, likewise, it's the same as that, and that's what brought me into this work was near-death experience through addiction, and I was very, very much blessed that I came out of my serious illness, and can live to tell the tale, but can also help others who are find themselves in relatively similar situations, and I'm very honored to be able to do that and be in a position to do that and be relatively healthy today at the same time, you know. So it's and Carl, people who talk about addiction, I mean, Gabor Mate being he had a respectful addiction, as opposed to the heroin addict was a dirty addiction.
Yeah,
But addiction is addiction,
yeah.
whichever way we look at it, addiction is addiction. Um, I always tell a story, and I'll just say it very quickly, Carl, about in my local village here, my dad would bring us as young children to the pub. He would have a couple of pints of Guinness. He wasn't a problem drinker. He wasn't addicted to alcohol in any shape or form. He just liked to go and have a couple of games of pool and a couple of pints of Guinness. But the guys in the pub that were drinking 20, 25 pints of Guinness that Saturday or that Sunday were deemed to be really great men because for some bizarre reason, the amount of drink they could drink meant that they were put up on pedestals and they were big men, hard men, that great man, he can drink 30 pints of Guinness on a Sunday. Well, his children had no lunch in their lunchbox on Monday morning going to school. And those very people would frown upon the heroin addict on the streets in Limerick or Dublin as addicts.
Mm.
So when we get the two together, the alcoholic in the pub and the heroin addict on the street in Limerick or Dublin, there is no difference. They're traumatized men. They're men that have been so traumatized that they use this addiction as a facade to try and allow them to get through life. So
That resonates, Aldo.
yeah,
My dad was a big drinker, and he was the kind of guy like I love him to bits. I've got a picture of my dad somewhere.
yeah,
That's me and my brother and my dad and my dad's brother going
lovely,
back to, oh, I don't know what year that could have been.
yeah,
I'm the dude with the orange trousers on there. I was a bit of a black sheep back then, even you can tell.
cool
But
dude.
it was it was it was the done thing to be a man that could handle your drink. And this generational or this cultural phenomenon was the business deals were done after you'd been out for a meal and after you'd been drinking. So if you were the man that could handle his drink the best, then you were the most respectable man to do business with. And that was the way my dad did business. He would just drink everybody else under the table. And he could drink, say, 10 or 20 pints or whatever and still walk in a straight line or still drive. And I couldn't do that at all. I was useless.
Yeah, yeah,
I was indoctrinated and ingrained in the
yes,
drink.
yes,
But I wasn't the kind of guy that you'd say could handle his drink. He just used to turn me into a bit of an arsehole, really, where I would be quite arrogant.
yes, of
And I'd
course.
and I'd and I'd speak to people disrespectfully. And when I unpacked that, when I was able to look at that as a sort of a vulnerable man, that was letting go of these behavior patterns, what I could see very clearly was abandonment and alcoholism in the same sort of vibration of the family system, especially in the male, in the masculine line.
Sure. Yeah,
My
yeah,
dad, my dad was a great guy, but his father died when he was 11, and he was probably an alcoholic before he even met my mother at the age of 19.
sure.
Such was this was your way to get respect in the culture, but the abandonment was there in the sense that he abandoned himself to the drink. And me and my brother grew up knowing nothing else but the pub. And
Yes.
so it was almost par for the course for us to welcome in these twin brothers of abandonment and alcoholism
Yes.
into our own lives. And
Absolutely.
in
Yeah.
doing so, I suppose you mask the things that you don't really want to look at. And to this day, I quite honestly sit there in a circle of men and say, I'm not the fattest, I'm not the fittest, I'm not the strongest, I'm not the quickest, I'm not the best, I'm not the smartest, but I will bring my authentic self to the table and be the best version of myself that I can be to help and support others in whatever they're going through. And I was only
Yes.
able to do that and be that through letting go of these kind of these twin kind of abandonment and alcohol and drinking. And I don't know, are more and more men sort of looking at that now, or is it quite trendy now to sort of, you know, be able to look at the multi-generational family trauma and evolve beyond it, or is it still quite a minority thing? I don't actually know. I don't
Yeah.
actually.
I would feel it's a minority thing, Carl, but it's taken a different route. I mean, the newest statistics in Ireland is that there is 20% less alcohol consumed over the past 20 years. So there's 20% less alcohol consumed over the past 20 years. So it takes a diversion. It's gone down a different road. It's not the culture of drinking like what was in Manchester, what was in Liverpool, other parts of the UK, and Ireland, of course.
It was no
That
different here, I'd say.
yeah, it will be the
It's
same here.
sunny. Let's
Yeah,
have a beer. It's pissing rain. Let's have a beer. There's
yeah.
some music. Let's have a beer.
Have a beer. Yeah, I feel
Everything was
sad.
a reason to drink.
Of course, I feel sad. I'll have a beer. I feel happy. I'll also have a beer. So it was like it was everything, you know. But across the UK, certainly into Wales, into Scotland, the same thing. Across Ireland was the same thing. That everything began to wind around this culture of drinking alcohol, and that was a way, you know, it was a social outlet as well, of course, but it was also, and I would teach a lot of this in my work that I can say that the reason that Ireland is such a strong drinking nation and has been is to do with past generational traumas here in this country. No different to the Maoris in New Zealand and the Aborigines of Australia, that there was a traumatized nation, a generation, over a historical thing, and that this continued to roll through the generations um, as a way of expression, a way of hiding wounds, a way of maybe trying to socialize in whatever shape or form. But it is changing and radically changing. And I don't mean it's radically changing for the better. There's just other ways of, whether it's technology, whether it's the computer games, whether it's drugs or whatever the case may be. I don't believe that addiction is much more reduced in Ireland. I just think it's in a different way. I think it's in a different way.
What's interesting there is through the work I did in the family constellations, what became apparent, and I wouldn't say this is any much different for an Englishman now, but every Irishman that walks on this soil is carrying with him energetically and subconsciously the shame of not being able to protect his women and children from the invader. So more recently, you can talk about the British Crown, and then further back, you can talk about the Holy Roman Catholic Empire. So going back to a time, say, before the Vikings, before the Celts, before the Gaelic,
Yeah,
take me all the way back to the Druids and the pagans and the people that lived in harmony with the environment.
yeah, yeah,
Is that like, to me, a shaman, or to me the shamanic is someone that lives in harmony with nature? And
yeah,
the and is that part of your modality where you're helping people reconnect
yeah,
to, because there's still very much a magic in the land here that you can connect with, what that hasn't gone away in spite of these multiple invasions, oppression, and you see very deliberately where the ley lines, the places have been sabotaged. They've built churches on energy points
Mhm. Yeah,
and turned them into a place for organized religion. But these were places where our ancestors, they met freely and connected with the land and the energies
of
of
course.
the land.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's the way I teach shamanism. I teach it through the multiple layers of our history on this land. And I will teach shamanism. I will go back 10,000 years and I will start teaching from that point. I can go beyond that into the Paleolithic period, but I'm not going to go that far
Atlantis.
back. Yeah.
Does
But
Atlantis
Atlantis,
feature in the genealogy or the I see a very clear lineage, shall we say, from Atlantis through to ancient Egypt,
yeah,
through to modern times, and there's an Irish connection with obviously it wasn't called Irish back then, but
yeah, of
there's a
course.
connection in what is Ireland today to Atlantis and to ancient Egypt.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a huge connection. I mean, there's a really good author, Belfast-born, US-based author called Michael Sarian. And Michael Sarian will talk about the Atlantis and that everything moved from west to east rather than a lot of the teachings that would have came was that all the knowledge and so on and the movement of people came from the east to the west. And Sarian has a number of books wrote about the movement from Atlantis, and that's where they were the scholars, they were the teachers that brought their knowledge and brought it across the world from west to east. So Michael Sarian will talk a lot about this. It's interesting because if you want to go deep dive into, science, archaeology, paleontology, anthropology, when you're looking at the movement of people. So what we do know, Carl, so what we do know is, and we know this through science, that, and people can interpret this in whatever way they feel they want to interpret it, but we do know that if you go to the Boyne Valley and you visit Newgrange and Louth and Douth, um, that the people that built those monuments did travel from the Middle Eastern region. We do know that. So the movement of people, we know it. I mean, like here's one for you, Carl. The oldest known Neolithic burial site in the country, what they say is the oldest and the first. Now, people can argue against this, but it's the Pulnerbrone Dolmen in the Burren in County Clare. The Dolmen, the Portal Tomb, they will say that's the first. That's the first. That is older than Newgrange. It's older than anything on the east side of the country. That's what they'll say.
We were there only 4 weeks ago with our ancient spiritual tours
Yeah,
people, and I'm
brilliant
blown
place.
away by it. It's magnificent.
Brilliant place. Yeah, really brilliant place, and predates by a number of centuries Newgrange. So what they say is that if you get onto the coast of France and you get into your boat and you had no engine, obviously, you had no sail and you had no oars, that the natural current from the French coastline will bring you down up through the coast of Ireland, the southern coast, and you will land on the west coast of Ireland by these natural currents. That's what they say. Because the
Fantastic.
question would be, if you're leaving the coast of France and you're planning on going to Ireland, for example, not that they said, "Oh, let's go to Ireland," but you would imagine that they would land somewhere down in Wexford, somewhere down in the southern region of the country, where they didn't. They landed on the west coast. And like talking about modern science and understanding the movement of people. I mean, in the Pulnerbrone Dolmen, for example, when the archaeologists excavated in the 1980s, they took the bones, they brought them to wherever in Dublin, DCU, UCD in Dublin, Trinity, wherever it was, and stored the bones. And only in the last few years, with the most modern science, they now begin to do DNA analysis on the bones. And what they do know is that these were people that originated in the Middle Eastern region, which is known today as modern day Turkey or Anatolia. Um,
It's where they
and they,
found Göbekli Tepe, right?
yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, they can tell by the bones in Pulnerbrone, they can tell the eye color, the skin color, the hair color, the diet. And the most fascinating thing about Pulnerbrone is that they discovered a bone from a young child, and through modern DNA analysis, they found out that that child that was interred in the Polar Brown dolmen, that child had cerebral palsy. So that's what modern science will do today. So, and we do know they moved from east to west. So I can only talk about hardline kind of science. It's more complex than that. But it's just to say, when I teach shamanism, we will work with the dolmens. We will physically work, but not just using dowsing rods and pendulums. We'll talk about everything from the people, where they originated from, their reverence for the dead. We do know the reverence for the dead because they built these phenomenal temples for the dead. So my shamanic work, I will teach about our indigenous ancient history, and that there are elements of my DNA that have elements of Neolithic. It has elements of Bronze Age. There's elements of Iron Age. There's elements of, Norman and many other things. So it's essentially a big mixing pot. But I'll teach this. It's very important to teach it. Again, Carl, it goes back to what we talked earlier on about to find out who we are. And it's not just my granddad or my great granddad. It's gone all the way back through the lineages and the millennia of people. And when we go to places like Carrickeel in County Sligo or Carramore or Loughcrew or whatever place we go to, that we are in that energy, in that space of our ancestors, and the ancestral spirits are quite prominent there.
I would say there's enough evidence to suggest that if you go back far enough, it was a matriarchal society as well.
Yeah.
Before Christianity and the bringing in of this patriarchal system,
Yeah.
I love telling people about a thing I read called the Banfili, which were like a race of female warrioress poetesses. They had the scholarship of the poets, but they had the ferocity of the warrioress, and they would never be taken prisoner. They would die defending themselves. And it was the man's job, obviously, to protect and serve. And in the stories, you've got like the Queen Maeve.
Yeah.
In England, you've got Boadicea, and you've got these famous sort of female figures that kind of, you know,
Prominent.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you see from some of the sites that we've been to, the Sheila gigs, and there's nothing demure and sort of, polite about the Sheilas. It's kind of in your face. It's get the fuck out of here, or you're fucking getting it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
and so there's this direct connection to in the feeling of the land, of the indigenousness here of a race of female warrioresses,
Yeah.
the Irish mammy, and it's not been mobilized just yet. But I think if the Bilderbergers and the New World Order numpties have continued to have their own way, then it's not going to be long before your sovereign Irish mammies will be marching on the Doyle to spank the bottoms of these gobshites that have sold us down
Yeah.
the river of the bureaucrats and the organizations that are serving these globalists.
Of course. Of course.
There's a huge sense of sort of something there. We saw it with the water protests,
Yeah.
and it's not gone away.
No, it's not gone away. And, when I have, the ratio we would have of students in the school with us, the ratio normal works out at about 70% women, 30% men. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. But what I do know is, and I will say, and it's not just the percentage, but it's the amount of people that are really interested and connected in with, the way that I teach our shamanic work through our history and through the layers and years of our traditions here in this country, that today they're following suit of something that happened over centuries and millennia in the country. So you look at our Tuatha De Danann, for example, or the Fir Bolg and other tribes of Ireland, and you look at these goddesses. You look at the Bridgets, you look at the Erus,
Eru,
you look at the Morrigans, you look at the Cailleachs, you look at They
And
grow
down
on you
here
whales and
in Limerick, we got to mention the goddess Anya as well, and Loch Gur.
birds.
Yeah.
Lochner, absolutely. And when you look at all of these names, like for example, every river in Ireland, except for one river, I think in County Down, was named after a goddess. Every river in Ireland one time was named after the goddess. And I explain to people the reason for that is that the rivers are simply the veins of Mother Earth. They're the veins of the great goddess. And every river was named after a goddess. And if you go to places like Fornox in County Meath and quite close to the Fornox Passage Tomb, there's a river called the River Nanny. And and then you drive through Tuam in County Galway, and you pass by a river called the River Nanny. And these were pretty poor English abbreviations of Anya. So the rivers, even though Anya had been connected to the sun, there were rivers called Anya. There was rivers called Clodagh. There were many, many rivers around the country that were named after the goddess. And in fact, all of the healing wells of Ireland all were named after the goddess until the patriarchal system came in and began to put men's names on rivers and wells. So there is a shift and there is a movement. There's no question about it. From the masculine, yes, and we can't be too lopsided in it at the same time. But we are very much aware of the patriarchal system and what damage the patriarchal system has done. We do know we have good indication in the Mesolithic period that it was very much connected to the feminine. We know in the Neolithic period. We know in the majority of the Bronze Age period that the feminine was in reverence. We do know towards the latter stages of the Iron Age, it began to turn slightly into a patriarchal system in the Iron Age. And then, of course, along came the Vikings, the Normans, etc., which equally brought in elements of the patriarchal system. And the ultimate, who wins gold medal today for this, is the Roman Catholic religious system. And they topped it all off as an ultimate patriarchal system. And the women were second-class citizens.
And burned at the stake just for having knowledge of herbs and
Absolutely.
flowers and wildlife. And
Yeah.
yeah,
And the funerals, Carl, where the tradition for thousands of years in Ireland and Scotland, I'm not sure about anywhere else, Ireland and Scotland, was when a person died, the women came to the house and they were known as the keeners. They were the women that cried over the body. The keeners, keen is an English abbreviation of queenu, which is crying in Irish. And the women came. About 100 years ago, the keening tradition was banned by the Roman Catholic Church, not for any other reason that they didn't want to see the women in power, that the Catholic Church was a patriarchal system, and they didn't want women having power. So the keeners were outlawed in Ireland 100 years ago and outlawed in Scotland 120 years ago. So all of these women that held power and had knowledge of herbs and so on, that they were diminished, demonized, and in many cases killed.
yeah,
Yeah. There
yeah.
is an upsurge. There's an upsurge now, Carl. There is an upsurge. What we got to be careful of that it doesn't get top heavy. That's very important. That we will always have the masculine and feminine balance, but we won't get it too top heavy. But the reverence of the feminine and the feminine taking back their power now is taking place, and it's really important that it continues.
Yeah. I've got some questions that I want to get
Yeah.
into with you.
Yeah.
What is your
Sure.
favorite smell?
Smell. Smell.
What is your favorite smell?
Oh, coffee in the morning, of course.
I used to live with an Italian guy called Roberto, and you could smell his coffee from a mile off. I think it took him about half an hour to make it. He made a big fuss over it, and it was a big deal, but it was never my thing, the coffee. But I
Yeah.
know for coffee lovers it can be, yeah.
Mm.
Have you ever jumped out of a plane?
Not yet.
Ridden a horse?
Yeah, yes, I have. Many
Driven a
times.
Ferrari?
No.
Have you ever had children?
Yes. 4 children, yeah.
In case they're watching, do you want to give them a mention?
Yeah, so I've had 4 children myself. I've fathered 4 children. There's another lovely girl, Quiva, who was part of my marriage. She was when I connected with my ex-wife, the baby was um, part of the family. Not I didn't father that baby; it was from another man. So I've had 4 children, but the 5 is Quiva, Haley, James, Clodagh, and Con.
Cool.
Yeah, and they're in England on holidays at the moment. So
Have you ever walked on hot coals? Not on
not
purpose.
intentionally. Not intentionally, no.
Have you ever done any public speaking?
Yes, lots of it. Lots and lots.
And I suppose
My,
it's a
yeah,
good opportunity to mention you'll be a guest speaker at the book launch of The Power of the Written Word in August in Mayo. I look forward to that.
absolutely.
Thank you
Absolutely.
for making
Looking forward to it.
yourself available. Yeah,
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah, I've done a lot of public speaking. You see, I worked in radio for about 28 years as a radio presenter for about 28 years. So I was always in that space, the microphone, speaking to people. And, coming into my shamanic work and doing talks and doing podcasts, um, it's not a whole lot different. It's just
second
more real.
nature. Water off a duck's back. Yeah.
Yeah, the subject matter is a little bit more real here, on these podcasts. So it's a little bit more real in the sense that, you know, um, sometimes in the radio industry down through the years, a lot of it was just materialistic noise.
I used to
Enjoy
love
the enjoy the
broadcasting.
all day. Yeah,
I had my own radio show called Legends. And I would sit up till 3 o'clock in the morning fannying around on YouTube and online back in the noughties to put together a show that I would then pre-record. And
yeah,
so I would pick a band that I liked, that I enjoyed, and just pick their favorite songs, and then write a bit of blurb that I would talk in between the songs about the
yeah.
band. And I absolutely loved it. It was brilliant.
Lovely.
They
Yeah.
always said I had a great face for radio, Aldo. I don't know. Yeah. Have you ever
Well,
eaten an insect?
yes,
Have you ever been abducted by aliens?
not yet.
Have you ever written a book?
It's on the table. Well, let's put it this way: the paper and pen is on the table.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's been there a while, but I'm just waiting for divine timing. But I feel it's coming quite close. I've been talking about writing a book for 5, 6 years now, but I know I'm getting quite close to it. There needs to be a little bit of an alignment, and then I'll get to it. But I know it's quite soon. Yeah.
Cool. What is there any and I love this section of the podcast. Are there any books that have changed your life or helped change your life, or any books, your favorite books or books that you'd recommend to anybody? You mentioned a gentleman earlier, Sarian, is it?
Michael Sarian, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Is
Michael
there any other
Sarian.
books that you'd recommend or that have helped change your life?
No, not any of his books. They're interesting ones to read, but they're a particular viewpoint on something, and it's good to see those viewpoints and other viewpoints, and then mix them together as your knowledge or if you know what I mean. There's a very interesting book called "Change Your Story, Change Your Life," wrote by a guy called Carl Greer. And it's about that we are not slaves to our past, and we have the ability to change our story in order to change our direction in life. So, in other words, understanding that we don't need to be locked into these old themes, and we have to stick with these old family traumas or these old themes that, we have the ability to move away from the past and create a bright future ahead, a bright road ahead.
Thank you.
That's a really good one. Carl Greer, Change Your Story, Change Your Life. It's a shamanic based book. It's a Jungian based book. It's a psychological based book, but it's really good. And there's another very good one, which is called Singing with Blackbirds.
Okay.
And Stuart A. Logan, I think he's the right one. He's a Scottish guy. He wrote a really good book. And it's really about, yeah, it's about shamanism essentially. But It's about ritual and methodology and history and the ancient language of Irish language and Scots Gaelic. So it's really good book. Yeah, I'm not an avid reader. Having said that, Carol, I read occasionally, but I don't pick up a book every day. I don't have time, to be honest with you. Um, yeah,
You're
so I'm
too
not an
busy
avid.
doing podcasts, man.
I'm too busy doing podcasts with the likes of yourself. Yeah, that's it. Um, I like to get knowledge from books, but information from books, but you know, yeah, I'm not an avid. I don't want to come across that I sit down and read a book every day, which I absolutely don't. I sit down and read a book every 6 months, maybe, or maybe every 12 months.
Cool.
Yeah.
There was one when you were talking earlier, there was one that jumped out into me, and it was a series of books I read when I was doing my psychology and philosophy degree in Leeds back in the 90s. And back at the time, I was just a permanent stoner. I used to wake up and skin up and go to bed and skin up all fucking day in between. But these books that I came across, they were about an American anthropologist called Carlos Castaneda, and he went to Mexico and he studied the life of a Yaqui sort of shaman is the only word I could use, Don Juan Matus. Are you familiar with the Castaneda books and the
Yes, I'm familiar with them. I'm not in detail, but I know the story. I'm familiar with the story. Yeah.
brilliant? What
Yeah.
he was talking about was they used ceremonial sort of mescaline and peyote, but the guy Don Juan, he had the capacity. I think in their language it was a brujo for a male and a brujera for a female. So they were effectively sorcerers, and they could change, they could shapeshift. Like Don Juan would shift into a crow, a shapeshift into a crow. And I wondered if there was any. Is that just in the Mexican, or is there anything in the indigenous Irish where the stories
Yeah.
of shapeshifting?
Yeah, of course. I mean, speaking of the crow, the Morrigan, which was a great battle goddess, would shift from a female form into a crow, and she would shapeshift back into female form quite regularly. The Children of Lir is a really good story as well of the shapeshifting
Thank
from
you.
human to, yeah.
Yeah,
So the goddess of the hare, the Hare, was the goddess who transformed from hare into female form back into hare form. So there are multiple examples in our Irish traditions and stories of the shapeshifter. I mean, in some parts of coastal areas here in the west of Ireland, the understanding would be that the seals were the transformation of the ancestors. So the ancestors shapeshifted into the seals. Now we can call that reincarnation, I guess,
yeah.
shapeshifting into another species or another form. But yeah, in our story, we in our mythology or folklore, here in this country, shape shifting was quite a normal thing to
There's a
happen.
great site down in Cork called the City or Shrone, where you can look out to the Paps of Anu that's associated with the Morrigan.
Yes.
And you can just imagine this really strong presence of a goddess energy. And yeah, I remember being there, and it was like part of some explorations we were doing down in Cork and Kerry for sites to include in the tour that we were putting together. Um, it, Talking about psychedelics, it's well known that the microdosing on the mushrooms can have a positive impact on helping people with addictions to drink and drugs and what have you. But again, that doesn't benefit the New World Order or the globalists or the Bilderbergers. So it's kind of the knowledge about that is suppressed. But
Yeah.
what do you know, or what would you like to share about sort of microdosing on psychedelics, not just as a cure for, say, being reared in a society that's profoundly insane, but when you go to the dolmens and the wedge tombs and these ancient sites, it's almost like they're you can see them as you are, say, sober, but you can imagine that they had a purpose and a function whilst the local indigenous medicine was being taken as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it's known fact that microdosing helps people with, depression, or people that maybe uh, caught up with addiction. Certainly, I mean, in shamanism, we would simply say it's the spirit of the mushroom that is helping the person. Just like ayahuasca, Mama ayahuasca, the spirit of ayahuasca is ultimately in conjunction with the plant. Rather than just taking the plant, there is the union of the spirit and the plant, or the spirit of the plant. So yeah, yeah, it's beneficial. This is known. It's beneficial. Um, how so? Just to give it an example, Loughcrew in Old Castle in County Meath is or was, I'm not sure. There's been talks about a lot of the magic mushrooms not growing there that well anymore, but they used to. And they will say with the phenomenal megalithic rock art that's at Loughcrew and places like that, that it was done through the taking of the mushroom psilocybin, and that they would be brought to another dimension through the spirit, through the mushroom, and that all of these megalithic rock art and the Boyne Valley, etc., would be something that was gathered from another dimension, another world, and brought here and anchored in here through it being permanently inscribed on rocks. So a lot of people talk about rock art. Some archaeologists will say, you know, um, non-interpretive rock art. In other words, that it actually means nothing, which is a big pile of shite, because of course it means something. It's a communication, it's a prayer, whatever word we want to use.
This is why
Um,
the knowledge that we can channel and the knowledge that we can intuit,
yeah,
even though it's not forensic, it seems to carry more weight than, say, observable mainstream scientific so-called knowledge. So
yeah,
if you accept that the indigenous people carried a lot more wisdom than what we have today. Even though we've got the internet and access to information, we've
yeah,
been dumbed down to the point where we're made believe that we're at the cutting edge of technology. And yet, everything that we can see from the old world that remains shows us very clearly that they were far more advanced in terms of spiritual knowledge. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was a huge connection, like we did Newgrange for the winter solstice, Stonehenge for the summer solstice, and then did the pyramids in Egypt, and places like Machu Picchu in Peru are on the bucket list, as well as
yeah.
she wants to go to Cambodia to the Angkor Wat, and these
Mhm.
incredible ancient sites. There's surely a connection with some sort of local medicine that you can imbibe that gives you an interdimensional sort of aspects. And even though that might wear off, as in it's not permanent, if they're all connected to the solstices and the equinoxes, it seems to me that they still hold a lot of value for us to learn from.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're not, say, just the alternative. It's not a minority alternative thing. It's actually the core of what we need to be looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, these are the epic. When I talk about, how I will teach shamanism, as opposed to other places in this country, I'll explain it. A lot of it is based on the indigenous and the ancient sites and how important they were, and they were liminal places. They were gateways between the physical world and the other worlds, the spirit world. They were very, revered, and not just in archaeology, we can talk about, passage tombs, but the grander scheme of it is that they're far more than a passage tomb. They're a temple. They're a place of worship. They're a place to commune with the dead. They're places where ladies may have went and birthed rebirthed new spirits into the world. So it wasn't just where the dead were placed; it was also where babies were born into the world. That's just not my claim. That's the claim of people that I've worked with that are birth doulas and very knowledgeable women who will talk about this. So they're very special places. Liminal places, influential places. When you go to a stone circle and you spend time in that place, you will be, you will find yourself in a different space, a deep peace. Your ancestors are nurturing you in that space. And just to go back a little bit, Carl, at the start, you said, well, you know, so the Neolithic Bronze Age people, for example, you know, they weren't drinking contaminated water. They weren't being hammered by electromagnetic frequencies. They weren't eating genetically modified foods. And the fundamental part of shamanism is this, that everything that surrounds us in the natural world are spirits, is of spirit. And we are just simply a part of that. Animism. We're just simply a part of it. So when I bring students out into a forest or into the natural world, it's very important. And I spoke to a student about this today, actually. It's one thing being in nature, but it's a different thing being a part of nature. They're different things. But being a part of nature is that deeper awareness that we are simply a spirit having an experience in this physical body, where the tree is of spirit. The tree possesses a soul, as does the flower on the grass, as does the rock, the mountain, the river, the lake. So we are just simply a part of this bigger universal creation, that we are all equal. In South American shamanism, it's known as Aini, Aini being that we're suspended in this space of equilibrium, that everything around us is alive and is of spirit, and that we're in reverence and we're in love of that space. And each one that thrives helps everything else to thrive. So it's all interconnected. But the modern human believes that they are the wheel, where we are no more than a little cog of many, many cogs that's on that wheel. And the disconnection and lack of connection with nature and the spirits of nature has driven the human being further and further away from the space that it originally was connected with, or ought to be, or whatever word we want to use. And the more children that are on these devices, disconnected from everything that's going on around them, it's that distraction and addiction coming into play in a different way.
So you're helping bring people back to themselves almost.
Yeah. Back to the most powerful medicine for human beings is the medicine of the earth. And that is the
Connection with the earth and connection with one another.
And that the medicine is there for us. And we can talk about medicine and shamanism in multiple ways. Medicine is energy, absorbing the energy of the oak tree by simply being in the vicinity of the oak tree, to communicate with the oak tree, to eat the medicine that grows in the natural world, which is a medicine in the physical form. So the disconnect from the natural world has been the demise of the human being, to drive a clear wedge between what allows us to survive and thrive. And
you can see a very deliberate plan to do that in order to manipulate and exploit human energy.
Yeah,
you could almost argue that we're just an alien loosh farm.
Yep, absolutely.
If we don't reclaim our sovereignty, that's effectively what we'll become.
And I think the basis of that, Carl, I think the basis of why I said that, because that's a fundamental part of our shamanic work, is to be in reverence of all living things. That's one thing. But it's also the it's the central role, it's the central remit of the shamanic practitioner, shaman, authentically and teaching with integrity. What is the baseline of our fundamental beliefs in shamanism? That's the baseline of it. And I was going to say something to you there, but I completely forgot what it is.
What came up for me there was I learned recently a little mantra, and it went along the lines of Om Mani Padme Hum, going back to I think the Hinduism and then the Buddhism. And what it means is the jewel in the lotus. And the symbology of this is the the individual soul personality in the sea of kind of universal soul. It's like we're never ever really disconnected from God or the universe or whatever you want to call it. Your essence is something that cannot be created or destroyed,
Absolutely.
you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the industry, we will talk about the indestructibility of the soul, the essence of the individual, that it will never be destroyed. It can never be destroyed. It will transform and move and, have multiple experiences into the future, but it can never be destroyed, and that's, you know, this is the physical body, but it has a sell-by date, of course.
I'm just conscious of the time and I don't
No,
want to keep you
no problem.
um any much longer. What has been your best trip abroad and why?
Best trip abroad. I look. I don't go abroad. But I
Well, if you're
do.
just in Mayo, it could be to Tipperary.
Yeah, yeah. Best trip abroad. I mean, yeah, I've been to trips abroad, but my best now is in a very different understanding to what my best would have been 20 or 25 years ago. Like, so
Sure.
head off to the Canary Islands and go on the piss for 2 weeks. That was great back then.
Okay, so let's say what
Yeah,
has been your most memorable trip abroad then, rather than the best?
that probably was my most memorable trip
The
abroad.
Canary Islands.
Out on the
Okay.
pitch on the Canary Islands or going to Paris. One of my really memorable trip was, and it's many, many years ago, for my first time visiting Paris, which was a nice experience, architecture and everything else. I do have past lives associated with there, which
Me too.
kind of, yeah, it can,
Well, only one that I know of.
yeah, I walked around, back streets in Paris, and I said I've been here before, which I physically knew I wasn't in this lifetime, but I had a relationship with it. And that can also track back to ancestral stuff as well. But um, I keep it very simple. It's very bread and butter for me, Carl. 4 weeks time, I'm going back to Glastonbury. I'm going back. Not that anyway, Glastonbury. Anyway, I could
The
talk about
town.
Glastonbury. Yeah, I could talk about Glastonbury's commercialism and all that, but the West Kennet Long Barrow in Wiltshire. I do enjoy visiting Avebury. I do enjoy visiting Stonehenge, even though a lot of its life has been sucked out of it through tourism and money, just like
And an
Newgrange.
RAF base next door.
Absolutely,
What the fuck were
absolutely.
they thinking there?
I know it's mad. It's mad stuff.
Ah,
But I mean, everything. Look at when you look at a lot of this stuff, and we see it here in Ireland as well. And you've been to the Bohey Stone over in Westport, and you see that there's a gable of a house within, 15 or 20 foot of the one of the most significant Neolithic sun worship sites in Europe, in fact, and they get planning permission to build a house within 15 or 16 foot of it. But that kind of shit went on for a long time.
right.
But I'll travel up through, I'll spend some time in Wales. I'll go into Wiltshire, travel up through the UK. I'll go into Edinburgh for a while, and then we'll shoot across to that place. That place. Can't remember. Kilmartin Glen. Kilmartin Glen.
Where's
Up
that?
on the northwest kind of Scotland. It has the most
Sounds good
phenomenal,
already.
yeah, Neolithic rock art. We're going there specifically for the rock art. We work quite a lot in that area. So that's my little trip in 4 weeks' time to the Wales, England, and Scotland. I'm doing a talk down in Kerry in October at the Archaeological Festival down there. We're going to bring a talk about the significance of these archaeological sites and spirituality, and we're going to marry the two of them together. That's down in Kerry. It's not too far down the road. But I don't do any exotic traveling yet. When the kids get older, I'll be in Peru. I'll be in Mongolia. I'd even go down to Antarctica for a while. Um,
Can you go?
one way or the other, I'll get there.
They'll make sure you don't see the ice wall, right?
It's to see it.
One of the most profound experiences I had here was going to Skellig Michael.
Yeah.
We went there a few years ago, and I was a bit green around the gills for the 2 hours of the boat out with John O'Shea from Cara Daniel. We
Daniel.
we somehow ended up going a longer way about it, but I eventually succumbed to some travel sickness, getting sort of rocked around, and we got there, and then it was an amazing ascent because of the mist and the clouds. It was all very, you mentioned the word liminal before. That's the perfect word for what Skellig Michael was like. And as we ascended up into the mist, not knowing what was there, one of the stone huts at the top of there, I had the pleasure of going into on my own. And all of a sudden, I was overcome with an overwhelming sense of peace and just being at one, like I'd finally come home. And everybody else could just fuck off and leave me alone. That would be fine by me.
Yeah, yeah,
Which I thought was
absolutely.
quite antisocial, but I was wondering, I couldn't get my head around, say, the rational mind or the thinking brain or the logic. There was none of that. It was just a purely soul type feeling of knowing, of being home, or that
Yeah,
that sort of intuition. And I
yeah.
definitely felt like I'd been there before. And what a great place to escape to.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, when you speak there, Carl, and I bring this to students all the time, and it's just my own observation and my own knowledge through ancient Irish spirituality, into early Christian Ireland, into other areas. But you know, when they talk about shamans in tribes, not completely, but in a typical setting, the shaman never lived within the tribal system. They lived on the extremities, on the outside. And when I look at some of those monks that were on Skellig Michael or like Inishkea off the North Mayo coast here,
Yeah.
they went as far away that they possibly could.
From
It's
people.
fucking from everything. And I think that's where they found themselves, the shamans and the early monks. There's a lot of stories there, Carol, of some of the early Christian monks in Ireland who had these
Is that
very,
the real Christians, as in the
yeah,
Coptic Church from
yeah,
Ethiopia and Egypt and what have
yeah,
you?
yeah, the early Christians, long before Roman Catholicism
Yeah,
came in, which is a
yeah.
completely different breed, a completely
Right.
different system.
Yeah.
But these individuals, and we see it in Tibet as well, but with the Tibetan monks have this phenomenally strong lineage with their shamanic roots where they originated from. Buddhism came into that region, but some of the shamans or the lineage of the shamans became the early Buddhist monks in those regions who still connected with this shamanic-like or animistic-like connection with their spirituality and Buddhism. And we see a very similar thing here in Ireland, where in the early Christianity in Ireland, a lot of these individuals, like St. Brendan, for example, St. Brendan the Voyager, known as the Voyager, everything about St. Brendan is the archetype of the shaman, essentially. The individual that
Or
travels
Saint
across the
Gobnet
sea.
that they made into a saint, but before that she was just known as Gobnet.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There are multiple ones. I mean, there's many things we could talk about with these early known as Christian saints that when you really delve into it, you look at it, they were more than likely in the pagan realm that were dragged in and set there as these figureheads.
Sanctified afterwards to kind of bring them within what the church was trying to assimilate and
Trying to do.
accumulate.
Yeah, I believe St. Patrick without question. This is my own belief. And I know people hold St. Patrick in high regard, St. Patrick's Day, green Guinness, all that kind of stuff. They don't want to be pissed off about what I'm going to say. But I really believe that St. Patrick is the the trimmed down, um, cleaned up version of an earlier pagan god. I have no question about that whatsoever. And they were just brought in to say, okay, just like you talked about earlier on, all the old churches were built on these ancient ceremonial sites, pre-Christian sites. Like the Mountain Patrick over the road from where I am was known, and we know this
Keep
through,
forgetting the name of it. Colin told me the Irish name
yeah,
for it before it was called Croagh Patrick.
well, Cruachan Eagly. Cruachan
Cruachan
Eagly.
Eagly, to do with the eagle, right?
Eagle Mountain, or some of the Druids in Ireland will call it Cruach Crom, which is relative to the god Crom.
Thank
So
you.
some Druid Cruach Crom,
Now that
some
resonates with a lot truer.
Yeah.
then there's no offense to anyone, Crow Patrick, but it sounds
Yeah.
a bit lame in comparison to the Mountain of the Eagle, right?
Yeah, the answer, yeah. So, like, I like to bring a lot of our Irish language into my shamanic teaching. So, we'll talk about all these words and names on mountains and names of rivers and what their actual significance is. And in our indigenous language here in Ireland, all of these place names, like, rivers and mountains, all had a name, and it always was within a spiritual context. So, I'll just give you an example. Like, Cruachan Eagly is simply the mountain of the eagle. That's what
Yeah,
it is.
yeah.
It's the mountain of Patrick now is called. It's been Christianized. That mountain was there long before Patrick came, and of course it had a name before Patrick arrived, and the original name was Cruachan Eagly. And if you skim a little bit over to the left hand side and you head a little bit more south from that mountain, you have a lovely mountain which is the tallest mountain in Connacht, known as Mulree. Mulree. So Mulree means nothing, but when you put it into the Irish language, it's known as Moel Ree, which is the bald king. So the name of the mountain is the Bald King. You will not get the name or the spiritual significance of a mountain using the English name. You have to transfer it to the Irish name, and you truly get the
And
meaning of
this
it.
is almost, again, coming back to what we've seen, the introduction and the use of English is actually furthering that disconnection from source and the meaning of these places and names.
Yeah,
So it's like, as an Englishman, I didn't know anything else other than learning English, right?
yeah, yeah,
But when you say come across, let's say, the writings of Tolstoy, the translation from the Russian into the English leaves you in no doubt that the Russian language is so much more colorful and rich and deep.
yeah,
English is like a poor relation. And you can see that with the Gaelic as well. You can see that English is like a poor cousin to the rather more regal sounding. And unless you're connecting to that way of speaking of the ancestors, then there's going to be something
yeah,
sort of removed in the
yeah,
disconnection of your
yeah.
identity. Yeah.
100%, Karen. It puts a divide between the absolute essence of that particular mountain or lake or village or townland. It takes it away because when it's brought over into English, it doesn't mean anything. It means nothing whatsoever. I mean, like, I'll give you an example. I went to school in a little townland called Derry Wash. Okay, Derry Wash. Derry Wash means nothing. It doesn't mean anything. It means zero. Okay. When you transfer it into its original name as Dera Bosch, it means the place of the dead oak. The place of the dead oak. If you go to the little townland next to it called Clune Keen, Clune Keen. Clune Keen means zero, it means nothing. You move it into its original language and it's known as Clune Quain, which is the meadow of tears or the crying field, whichever way we look at it.
Much more
But
poetic, right?
yeah, but there's a reason for it. Maybe the babies are buried there. Maybe something happened there, and that's a terrible thing took place. And this is where the crying took place. So my reckoning is it's probably to do with what's known as a killeen, which is a child's burial place, and that
Mm.
people will go there and they would cry for their children, and that's why that townland now is called Clune Keen. And any place around the country, um, that has Clune in it, or has Derry in it, or has drum in it, like Drum, for example, any place name with drum, it means the gathering place of people. That's drum means where the people gather. And typically, a place name where there's drum, there is an enclosure or some ancient site there. So the Irish language, they're not directly naming the site, but they're directly naming that people gather there for ceremony, of course. So any place name with drum means gathering place. So this is what I teach in my shamanic work to say that if we can understand, I'm not telling people you need to learn fluent Irish. What I'm saying is, if we can understand the place name,
I'd love to, but I
yeah,
realized many moons ago when I first came here that if every vowel was pronounced in five different ways, it was going to be a hell of a struggle.
yeah,
And
yeah.
anytime I asked someone Irish to teach me some Irish, they said Pogue Mahone, and that was all as far as it went.
But you did understand what Pug Mahone means. You did.
Eventually, yeah, but it was like what they're saying is I I can see that there's almost a very difficult relationship between Irish people and their mother tongue because everyone's sort of made learn it in school, but unless you're going to be a teacher or a guard or something, it's so you never really learn it, but you can learn it, say, to conversationally to a point,
Yeah,
but maybe there's a real strong sense of that needs to come back.
yeah. Well, I'm gonna just mention this so yes, number one is when we were in school and how we were taught, it was very mundane, very boring. A child, if it doesn't excite a child in some way or form, or it becomes interesting for a child, what a child will just clam up and reject it. Because they're being forced to do it. So Irish teaching needs to be fun and it needs to be taught in a very different way. We're still teaching Irish in many cases in a very mundane way. And it seems like you're being forced to learn. Historically, let me tell you this, Carl, from a historic point of view, that there is a huge imposter syndrome with some people in Ireland when they are asked maybe even to say a couple of words in Irish. They seem it's an imposter syndrome. Now that's trauma based, really, because if you go back to the ancestral lineage, you will see that even as far back as my great grandmother spoke Irish because that's what they spoke. That's my great grandmother. It's not going back. I'm not going back 1,000 years.
Yeah.
I'm going back maybe, 120, 130 years ago. My grandmother spoke Irish fluently, and that's how she went about her day. But a very something happened in Ireland, and I'll tell you what it was. That particularly through the famine, people turned their back on Irish and they began to embrace English because they believed the Irish language was specifically connected to poverty, hunger, and death. Because that's the language they spoke when they got sick, when they had no food to eat. And that the English language would seemingly bring more prosperity and a better future for them.
Well,
So
it
within
would
the,
do if there was a fucking soldier there with a gun
yeah,
making sure that a ship
yeah,
is shipping the grain somewhere
yeah,
else
yeah.
and you're fucking
Well,
starving.
yes, I agree. People were forced to speak English. There's no
Yeah,
question about it. But
yeah.
from a historical or from an ancestral or from the Irish psyche, that a lot of people will say what happened was that they began to turn their back because the English language seemed to have brought maybe a future in some shape or form, where the Irish language brought nothing but poverty and starvation, and people did begin to associate it with that, and you'll see over the past 120 years how so much of the country spoke Irish, and now it's just pushed out to the far western regions like North Mayo here into Balmullet, Tourmakeady here in Mayo, into Connemara, Western Kerry in that region. And
South
yeah,
Watford,
there's elements
The Gaeltacht area there as well, yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's a couple of dots of Gaelic, yeah, but the primarily spoke Irish now is over into the western fringes of the western seaboard.
I would love to see that turned around.
Yeah,
And so the beautiful natural language of this land was associated with wealth and abundance.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it's something, there's an old saying, take the language from the people, you take the soul from the people. You know, when that happened
Mm.
in different parts of the world where the French and the English and the Spanish and so on invaded vast parts and the Dutch invaded vast parts of the world, they took their language from them and forced them to speak this foreign language. And they'll say you take the soul from the people if you take their language from them. And I think that the people, the aggressors knew this as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, have you ever cheated death?
Yes,
You alluded to that before.
I did. I cheated death in the sense that
At least once, anyway. Probably
yeah,
more times.
once, and of course that was through my addiction and through a serious health issue. Liver was about to pack in. Finding myself in the intensive care unit in the hospital. My skin was completely yellow. So I was on the final couple of steps, and even the consultants came and said, um, you, there's a distinct possibility that your liver is going to shut down over the next day or two.
That sounds pretty much like Last Chance Saloon, Aldo.
Left chancellor, yeah, yellow skin and everything. And this is 18 years ago. It's 18 years this coming October, actually. Um, and I experienced a spirit intervention where a spirit visited me in that state. It was a very interesting place to be, Carl, because I surrendered at that point. I surrendered. I said, if this is the last, few hours, so be it. And I actually felt an inner peace.
Yeah.
I felt that I surrendered and I said, so be it.
And
And
that's usually the point at which
yeah,
some magic
yeah,
happens because you surrendered. All of a sudden,
yeah,
another path has opened up,
correct. Absolutely. Um,
almost like the hero's journey.
well, that's exactly it. I mean, and I say that when we talk about the hero's journey, we talk about the dark night of the soul. Uh, uh, to our students here with the school, we'll talk about that and say, well, you know, I had to go to that depth, and I'll say it was very close that everything was taken.
What age were
Everything.
you, out of interest?
At the time, I was 33 at the time.
I had mine at kind of 44. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, in
What changed?
shamanism,
Did you just make a conscious decision there and then to change your ways, or
no, 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 I made no decision whatsoever.
right?
Something took over. I had a spirit intervention. I had a visitation from a spirit. I can't say I was asleep. I can't say I was awake. I was in that middle ground space. I just felt this overwhelming sense of a visitation from this individual who was a relation of mine, who interestingly died from alcoholism about 7 years prior to that.
Right.
And I felt that individual around quite strong. And I can only say from that point up to this very present time sitting here, never once did I crave alcohol after that. Never once did I crave alcohol. And I've been around people, we go for dinner, people will have drinks, you know, and I have I never had one craving or a minuscule craving to say, got a pint of beer, it'd be nice now, wouldn't it? No, no interest. It was taken from me. I was very lucky. That was the cull of the old version of me. It was cut off me. In shamanism, it's known as a deep initiation. It's like, well, there's two things that might happen here. All of you will die here, or the pieces of you that needs to be cut off and killed. And that's what happened. The pieces of me that need to be
That's a
taken away.
beautiful way of describing
Yeah,
what happened to me as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a rebirth. It's a
Yeah.
rebirth. Then these old heavy bags of toxic poison that you carried around for years and years had just been taken away. And I was still in hospital for a few weeks after that because I needed to, because I had a physical problem going on. My liver recovered. Bizarrely, it was discovered that I had no cirrhosis of the liver, no scarring of the liver tissue, which was amazing. But I needed that time, and it rested. My dad, um, he left us 10 years ago, but he was great help. And I remember getting a lift um, from the hospital to my parents' house, which I stayed in for a few weeks. And I remember driving out that road or been in the car, and literally the clouds opened up in the sky and the sun shone through. And that was an incredible experience.
I
It was an
believe it.
absolutely incredible experience.
Yeah.
The dark clouds just parted, the sun shone through. And it was, to me, it was like, the dark clouds have now parted. And that was on the two levels. And the sun began to shine, and things just looked better at that point in time. And I was very, very lucky. My life changed around, and that's what brought me into shamanic work.
Yeah.
I needed answers. I needed to find out. I needed to find out that spirit intervention. I needed to find out more. I met a shaman down the country. I ended up training with him for a few years in shamanic work. And yeah, I just needed to find out I also came from a lineage of healers. On my father's side of the family, there were Shamanic, there were storytellers, there were musicians, there were healers. My dad was a shaman. If I told him that, I said, "You're a shaman, Dad," he'd say that I'm a big idiot. You know what I mean? Like, but he had all, and my grandfather the same. They had just that energy and that connection with the land, and a very humble way of looking at life. No materialism meant nothing. Materialism meant nothing. If you had the basic stuff in life, that's all you needed. And that's the philosophy of shamanism. Materialism means nothing in shamanism. What car you
Yeah.
drive, what house you live in, it's immaterial. It doesn't matter.
I've always felt that way. I've always felt that, a car and a house and clothes and anything fancy like that didn't matter.
Yeah,
I've always been strongly inclined to the spiritual, but part of my learning has then been in having to embrace abundance and why not have nice things. And I spent my 50th birthday in the pub in Ballyglass, just drinking peppermint tea in me own cup, surrounded by people drinking pints. And like you, I didn't feel any graw for the drink whatsoever.
no,
It was real magic to have been able to let that go,
of course, of
and a
course.
real sense of not needing it or not. It's like I compare the addiction with tobacco and smoking as like you could see this desire coming and it gets stronger and it gets stronger and it get bigger and you just kind of move and then whoosh, you'd watch it
Yeah,
go away again and it'd
yeah, yeah,
pass. And it was like, wow, yeah. And it was always the smoke after the meal. Anytime I ate, I'd always have to have a smoke after a meal. And sure enough, we were able to watch it pass and go. And
yeah.
it's almost like the younger version of me was characterized by this hungry ghost, literally needing to get pissed, get stoned, and get laid in that order every single weekend. We didn't know
Oh,
anything else. It was just what we
no, we
did.
didn't. Yeah, and it was, in shamanism through our practice of soul loss, where people lose elements of their soul through traumatic events, etc. That, yeah, I mean, an element of it is the void filling. What's the inner void we're trying to fill here through these behaviors? And you know, don't get me wrong, Carl, when I came out of hospital, and it didn't mean that all of these traumas were healed from me. It means that spirit came and helped to take away that toxic energy that was embedded in me, and
Yeah,
and drew it out, which was that draw to self fucking destruct, essentially. At the time, at the end of my drinking, I didn't give two shits what happened. I didn't care. I'd lost the graw for life. I'd lost my drive, my everything. My soul was just a little murmur of what it should have been. Um, so I had a lot of healing to do after that.
yeah.
All that amazing stuff like the spirit intervention, the clouds partying, and but these were messages to drive me on, to inspire me, essentially. But I had huge amounts of ancestral healing work to do, huge amounts of soul retrieval to do, healing the traumas, and got into that space over a very lengthy period of time to get myself into a good grounded
Oh, this
place.
is something. This is something I wanted to ask you, and I'm just
Yeah,
conscious that we're running out of time, so I won't keep you. But when you mentioned about the soul retrieval,
yeah,
I
yeah,
saw this lady in East Cork about two or three times, and it was brilliant. She did a kind of shamanic healing on me, and was very, very fascinating to do. But it was almost like, do you know in the Harry Potter books or the Harry Potter movies, this
yeah,
concept of Horcruxes,
yeah,
where this guy's soul has been divided into seven parts and they occupy physical objects that you can go and get
yeah.
and bring them back. And I'm like, that's no work of fiction. That's mystery school knowledge, man. That's not anything fictitious. It seems to be a real thing and a real path and a real journey. All of us at some point to become whole again, you know?
That's it. You know, People through their timeline, through their lives, to use an analogy, they get this, you get the stuffing knocked out of you through different things that takes place. And what I mean by the stuffing knocked out is that through traumatic events, it can It could drive an element of our life force energy it drives an element of our life force energy away from the energetic space, or a fragment of your soul will leave, or an element of your consciousness will leave through these frightening events, traumatic events, whatever word you want to use. But it means that we are now without it, which means we find ourselves in a weaker or a more vulnerable state. In shamanism, we understand that we have what's known as the luminous energy field. We all have luminous energy fields that surround our body. But the luminous energy field, when we experience a trauma, a soul piece leaves, an element of our consciousness, an element of our essence leaves. That is the illumination. The illumination gets weaker. And if people go through series,
so could you say almost when you're born, that luminescence is strong and bright, and then certain life episodes happen along the way that dim your light.
Yes.
And then almost you get to, say, a critical point, which you alluded to as the dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
And then it's almost like if you're lucky, you have the chance for that light, that luminescence to come back. And that brilliance that you are, that brightness, that illumination can then function as a way of inspiring others. So we become inspired and we have the capacity to inspire others. And they in turn and it pays it forward like a domino effect.
Yes, absolutely. The way, for an individual whose luminous field has become very weak, it's very clear that they have had a series of events in their lives that has literally knocked the stuffing out of them. Their luminous field is weaker. And remember, the luminous field is our first line of it's our first line of defense energetically. That when people have huge levels of soul loss, they will find themselves in this constant cycle of bad luck and trauma taking place in their lives, simply because their energetic field now is easily violated or easily compromised. So in our shamanic work, and we call it the hollow bone in our shamanic work, is to begin to work through these losses, through this loss of self. Carl Jung talks about loss of self. What he's talking about is shamanic soul loss. That's where he's getting the information from. That every time we go through a negative experience, we lose a little piece of ourselves and we become that little bit weaker. How do we regain this back? Well, it's a very, very specifically shamanic ritual to now hunt for those lost soul pieces, to gather them and to reintegrate them back into the body, and allow those inner voids to be filled naturally with what has been lost. The luminous fields become stronger unless we may feel that we need the crutch of alcohol or heroin or pornography or whatever the addiction may be. So they're natural. In my case,
peppermint chocolate.
Peppermint chocolate. I love it.
Peppermint tea and peppermint chocolate is about as hardcore as it gets on a Friday night these days, Aldo.
And likewise, Carl, look at it. One of the very wise Native American chiefs was asked a question: what is poison? Some white man said, "What is poison?" And what he said was, "Poison is anything in excess.
Too much of anything. Yeah.
Too much of anything, and it can be too much peppermint chocolate. I love chocolate, by the way. It's very hard for me to even put a marker on this. I don't know. Half a bar is okay.
I think I just replaced my alcohol and cigarette and gambling and porn addictions with peppermint chocolate and peppermint tea. You could argue that I have in a way, but I've become a much better person in the process and privileged to help inspire other people to become better versions of themselves as well. So I'll take it, but at some point I'll have to give up the peppermint tea and give up the chocolate and let it go.
Absolutely. But the thing about it is, I think we all have some level of addiction in whatever shape or form it may be.
And more healing to do.
Yes, and there's healing to do.
Yeah.
But I wonder, and this is always a question you can throw out there, will there always be something that we're fond of? Is it the poison? Is it the excess? That's for people to try and perceive or understand themselves in their own way. But it's a very simple, humble, direct answer. The chief said to the American guy, anything that's in excess is poison, therefore it's harming us in some shape or form.
Yeah.
You can set levels. I mean, you can talk about heroin or peppermint chocolate. I mean, you can put it in, gauge it in levels if you like. If you feel, this is, if you feel that that is not doing you any good, then that's your incentive maybe to leave it down. But here's an interesting one for you. If you believe that it is not harming you, then the chances are it won't harm you. But if somebody's barking in your ear, telling you that's going to hurt you, that's going to harm you, you are probably negatively manifesting that in anyway, you know?
This is why it's really important to switch off the TV, stop buying and reading the
Yep.
newspapers, and filter out all of that fear porn
Yeah.
that is creating a bedrock of people enmeshed in lower vibrational energy and behavior patterns.
Yeah.
And again, our conscious awareness is the only real weapon or tool we have to be able to say, no thanks, not doing that, you
Yeah.
know?
Absolutely, 100%. You know, I was over the good weather. I was out with students on a Sunday. We were visiting a site. I had a bottle of Coca-Cola with me. I took a drink of the
Toilet
Coca-Cola.
cleaner.
Yeah, and lovely. I love it. What you call? I was drinking the bottle of cola, and one of my students said, "That's really, really bad for you." And I said to my student, "It's only really bad for me if I believe it's really bad for me." That's what I said. Carl, we were told, look at nicotine, nicotine, nicotine. It's so bad for you. It's terrible, blah, blah, blah. I mean, the latest scientific stuff has come out now that they're now going to administer nicotine for children with ADHD, people diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and multiple other things. People that got the COVID jab, now they got to stick a load of these nicotine patches on them. And now they say that nicotine is
Still
quite good.
believe. Yeah.
Nicotine is in your white potato. Nicotine is in your tomatoes, even your organic tomatoes. Nicotine is in them. Nicotine is actually a medicine.
Imagine.
It's actually a medicine. So whatever about everything else in the cigarettes, the tar, the chemicals and the
When you
shite.
talk about medicine, I firmly believe that it's the stuff that grows around us. So I don't know where the potato came from, but it's probably not Irish,
No.
even though Ireland is associated with a potato. But when I look outside, I see dandelions, I see buttercups, I see daisies, I see nettles, and they're in
Yeah.
abundance. To me,
Yes.
that's medicine right there. But
Yeah.
we've almost I wouldn't say we've lost the knowledge of what to do with those things, but it's almost like it's been suppressed from us as well.
Well, I think we have lost the knowledge, Carl. I think we have all but almost lost the knowledge. I know that there are some very good people out there that are trying to bring this knowledge back, which I think is brilliant. I remember doing a workshop, no, sorry, a fire ceremony in County Offaly a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
My former student owns the place, a lovely lady called Maureen Mahoney, down in Salem at Puan. And at the end of the ceremony, Maureen came to me and she handed me a jar of honey. She has bees. And she said to me, "I'm going to give you this as a gift, but I shouldn't be giving it to you." And I said, why should you not be giving it to me, Maureen? She said, "You should not eat the honey that is not
Local.
produced very local to you."
Yeah.
Now, County Mayo, County Offaly, it's not a million miles away. So what the understanding is that you should eat everything within a couple of miles radius.
Yeah.
And here's why. Because the plants are so tuned into you, they will
Yeah.
produce what you need. The plants 10 miles down the road aren't tuned into you as such, but the ones within a closer radius are actually tuned into the humans living in that area, and they produce what they feel that the humans need. That's how much the plants are tuned into us. Unfortunately, in many cases, it's not a two-way road. They're
You
tuned in.
remember, I think there was
Yeah,
a guy, Paul Stamets, the mushroom guy.
yeah,
I remember watching a podcast he did with Joe Rogan where he basically explained that the network of fungi underneath the ground was so extensive and so intelligent that you could actually argue that the human race was being used by the fungi to proliferate. We're no more than, just mushroom spreaders for the mushrooms.
Yeah,
it's an older knowledge of system than we have.
absolutely.
And I thought, this is just so fucking whack. It must be true. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Did you ever watch Clarkson's Farm?
Clarkson's Farm.
So it's Jeremy Clarkson bought 1,000 acre farm in the
I'll watch it
Cotswolds.
now you said it, but I got rid of my TV about 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's on Amazon. It's very good. But he starts growing mushrooms, and he gets them from these really knowledgeable mushroom guys, and they talk about the mushroom and the intelligence of the mushroom, and that the mushroom is actually a sexual organ.
Right.
It's a sexual organ. What the mushroom's role is to continually multiply and develop and develop. So essentially, the mushroom is a sexual organ, um, and how it's super tuned in. And mushrooms like lion's mane and all these other mushrooms are just super medicine that the mainstream system doesn't want anybody to know about. Here's something I learned on Sunday from one of my students. We were talking about the sacred trees of Ireland. We talked about white poplar, also known as aspen.
Okay.
Okay. Aspen is carries a medicine that helps with pain relief, essentially. You know your aspirin tablets. Well, aspirin is named after aspen because what's in an aspirin tablet is what they extracted from the aspen tree. So they've taken this natural that people were very aware of for thousands of years, and they capitalized on it. They take the medicine from the tree, they put it into a fucking capsule or whatever, and they call it aspirin, which
I
actually
don't
is
know if
named.
I'd even recognize an aspen if I saw one.
Yeah, white poplar, also known as white poplar. There's a couple of
Yeah.
names of the tree. Um, and they're an indigenous tree. They're one of the 20 sacred trees of Ireland, and they're one of them. So it's like all of this stuff.
We didn't even talk about Ogham, did we?
No, we didn't even talk about Om. No, no.
Yeah.
Which is which is phenomenal. Yeah, Om
The
is quite
birch
phenomenal.
being the first. The number one was the birch tree, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Beth. Beth. Interestingly, in the old Om or primitive Irish, oak was known as Jor, Duir, Jor. We more so know oak now as Dara.
Darren,
Yeah, so like County Derry is known as Dara.
Kildare.
Kildare, absolutely. Mayo is Mayo, which is after the yew tree. Mayo is the plain of the yews. So the
Thank you.
trees were very, very important. And as you probably know, in the old Brehon laws, the trees were very much protected and respected and revered in the old pre-occupation Brehon laws. But and the oak tree is Jor in a primitive Irish. We more so know it now in more modern as Dara, but Jor simply meant door. Just like this fella here behind me. That's the Courtney Davis Hill of Tara artist who who created the
That's not the
magical.
Paps. I thought that was the Paps of Anu behind you there.
This no, this is
The
the
goddess on
other
her back.
um
The two mountains.
and back here.
Yeah.
I would believe is the waves of the
Pretty
ocean.
cool, isn't it?
Yeah, which would be representative of the ancient Irish way of shamanic journeying through the other, moving into the other world through the Curragh, across the sea, and eventually you arrive on an island out at sea, and that island will be a place that you need to gather information and knowledge from that place. So, known as the Imrama, which means journey by sea. And if you get into the Curragh and you row out to sea, eventually you arrive on an island, and on that island there is magic to find.
I am going to do a 1 minute quick fire round.
Okay.
And in advance of that, thank you so much for your time today. I get the
And thank you.
feeling we could talk for a few hours, and
And
it's
we
been
will.
an absolute pleasure to hear from you. Yeah,
And thank you. I really enjoyed being on your podcast.
you're welcome. Aldi or Lidl,
Howdy,
England or Germany,
England.
sunset or sunrise,
Sunset.
blonde or brunette,
Brunette.
Manchester or Liverpool?
Is this a trick one?
No, just whatever you feel.
Liverpool.
Brown or pink?
Pink.
Kerry or Dublin?
Kerry.
Spots or stripes?
Stripes.
Gardening or the gym?
Gardening.
Boccherini or Echo and the Bunnymen?
Echo and the Bunnymen.
Sun or moon?
Oh, that's a real difficult one. I'll say moon.
Emerald or ruby?
Emerald.
Silver or gold?
Gold.
Beer or wine?
Coca-Cola.
Neither in this case. Meat or cheese?
Meat.
And finally, forest or beach?
Forest.
Thank you once again, sir, for your time.
And thank you.
We'll leave it at that. Take care and God bless
Thank
you.
And thank you.
The Menscape Podcast with Carl.J. Ashley.